me, Ryan? Maybe
Yeah,
Elizabeth can't hear me.
I can
Okay.
hear you. I just texted her.
Can we maybe message Elizabeth? Let's see.
I just did.
Okay. 15 attendees. What should we get up to?
I didn't see any, I didn't have the time to go check in the attendees.
It's right on the top left corner.
Oh, I know. I don't know how many registered. Saying.
Yeah, there's 18, Katrina.
Oh, that's it?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. There's 18.
Maybe we should wait a little bit more.
I think we're at 18.
We're also live, by the way, right now.
Great. Okay. Do we want to go ahead and get started then?
I think we should maybe wait just maybe this a few more minutes, 3 more minutes.
Got it. Okay.
Just for everyone's notice, we're going to wait till about 2:05 to let people sign on. You know, Teams, obviously, different platforms. We want to give everyone a chance to be able to get to the webinar in time. So we're going ahead and get started at 2:05.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Just to let newer attendees know, we're going to wait till 2:05 just to make sure everyone has access to the webinar before we get started. So we'll be starting at 2:05.
Thanks, Ryan. We're up to 25 attendees now, Ryan.
Yes.
Great. It is 2:05, so I do want to be mindful of everyone's time today. Thank you, Jeff and Elizabeth, and to our STO IT department for helping us facilitate this presentation. I am Katrina Johansson, and I am the Executive Director of the California School Finance Authority, and I'm joined today by Elizabeth Mendez and Ryan Story to lead our presentation. Jeff Martin is co-lead of the SB740 program with Elizabeth, but could not join us today. But Jeff and Elizabeth are great resources for any school applying for the program, or if you're a current grantee, I do encourage you to reach out to them. Ryan was the lead over the SB740 program for a number of years, so he's also a great resource, but he's kind of backup resource as he's quite busy with other programs. CSFA has administered the Charter School Facility Grant Program since 2013. This funding round marks our 10th funding round. We hope the information we impart today is helpful, and we are available to answer questions at the end of the presentation, or you can contact one of the CSFA contacts listed at the end of the presentation. I also wanted to note that we are aware of the $40 million program augmentation that is in the governor's proposed budget. We are continuing to monitor the outcome of the budget and provide information to program applicants and the public once the augmentation is enacted. So with that, I want to turn it over to Elizabeth Mendez. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Katrina. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Elizabeth Mendez, and as Katrina mentioned, I am one of the co-leads for the SB740 program. We want to start off today with the table of context and just cover the topics that we will be covering in today's webinar. We're going to start off with the program overview and then dive into other costs, regulations, eligibility, as well as new applicants information, facility agreements, appraisals, and reimbursable lease cost, and a little bit of an overview on the application process itself, and the agreements for the facilities and independent appraisals, and then finish off with some data and statistics and upcoming events, and then just briefly go over some of our important reference materials that you can access once we post this webinar online on our website. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Ryan to discuss some of the program overview points. And thank you so much, Ryan, for kindly filling in for Jeff today.
No problem, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. Just also wanted to say we also will have time for, if we have time for questions at the end, if anyone has any questions, to post them into the conversation or to email us if it's a little bit more specific, just so we can make sure that we answer your question and get everyone's concerns addressed. For general program overview, over the last 3 years, we've seen an increase each year in program funding after a few years of it being stagnant. This year is an estimate based on the current governor's proposed budget of a little about $182,500,000. That is with the additional increase, as Katrina mentioned in the introduction, of the augmentation related to accessing other grant funding, other cost funding, which we'll cover in upcoming slides. The main aspects of the program are thresholds in which the program is meant to assist charter schools are schools that are serving at least 55% of students meeting free or reduced price meals, or FRPM, or located in an attendance area of an elementary school that has at least 55% of its student population eligible for FRPM. And there also has to be a preference in admission when it comes to schools that are relying on that when it comes to eligibility. We'll discuss that a little bit further on as well, but it has to be actually listed or provided in the approved charter petition for the charter school. Our funding formula, which is the backbone for our award determinations, is based on the lesser of the two following. The ADA rate, which is currently estimated to be $1,298. That may change. It is related to COLA and is determined by the Department of Finance. It's something we report on rather than choose. So please do sign up for our listserv as a way to get updates when we're able to have a more finite number. The current budget bill is AB 840, almost similar number enough to remember, and that one coincides with what the actual ADA rate will be. The second part of the funding formula is 75% of eligible lease or rent costs. The lesser of these two numbers would determine what the school's actual award would be capped at, in addition to other costs and the caps that go on that we'll discuss in upcoming slides as well. So just to give a better example of the funding formula as it works. So let's say a charter, XYZ charter in 2021-22, because we're going to use opening ADA from the previous year until we have the newer ADA for the current funding round. And we're going to be able to establish that there is 50.4 as the average daily attendance, times that by the rate, about $65,000, a little bit over. And then the reimbursable rent for this go round, sorry, that year should be updated, is $5,000 a month based on the space that they're renting for this. So that times 12 at 75% of that 60,000 is 45,000. So since that is the lesser of the two numbers, 45,000 would be the award cap that is is provided for XYZ charter. As people of the program that have been around for a few years, actually prior to 1920, which was the funding round that we first were not able to provide other costs, schools that are capped at their reimbursable rent amount have the ability to fund up to their ADA cap in other costs, provided the augmentation goes through in 2022-23. So just want to reiterate as we go into here, there is no funding for other costs for the current funding round. Historically, this would be about the time when we ask schools to gather up information related to other costs. It is during the actual fiscal year, so it would be from July 2021 through June 2022, and we would ask for schools to start gathering to send those in for our review. This year, it is not a possibility, so just want to make sure people are putting in efforts that would be fruitless, unfortunately. For the next funding round for 22-23, the governor is proposing $30 million in augmentation. These would be an attempt to fund other costs. We have to fund lease and rent costs fully. Based on this number, we're able to not only provide rent lease costs up to 100, but cover a substantial amount of other costs. We just don't want schools to assume that A, you'll have all other costs covered. It is still within the cap of the funding formula within the ADA cap. And then secondly, more than likely, we will have to prorate other costs as well to make sure that every school gets an appropriate amount of their other cost funding. So please do keep those two things in mind as you go forward with this application and fiscal year. Things that you can use other cost reimbursements for, things such as remodeling, deferred maintenance, installation of or extension of service systems, built-in equipment, site improvements, ADA compliance. A newer one is things to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. We're not too certain on the exact list for that, so please do keep record or try to get record of everything you did spend related to the mitigation of COVID-19. Typically, temporary items have not been allowed, or disposable items, but again, that has not been defined. Please do keep all invoices and receipts as we're working through the finer details of that. And as we work through that, we're getting our regulations more in step with the updates that are moving forward. Our current regulations are still in effect for the funding round that we are in, 21-22. Those can be found on the SB740 website. They're listed as our current regulations. We are currently working with the Office of Administrative Law, OAL, to approve updates to our good standing confirmation process, as well as our appeal process. So if folks want to check that out, that is also on the SB740 website. The website will be provided at the end of the presentation here, and it is under the proposed regulations at the bottom of the page. Again, those are not active, but they're expected to be active for the 22-23 funding round, which is the funding round we are talking about the application for today. Any questions about that, of course, please do feel free to post in the chat or reach out to us. But again, the information can all be found online if you're looking for just a quick review. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Elizabeth to talk about eligibility and best practices.
Thank you, Ryan. Okay, so up next is our eligibility and best practices. We want to start with defining the eligible cost. First and foremost, to be eligible, the facility costs associated with the sites cannot be owned by either a school district or county office of education. So not located in district or Prop 39 facility. The applicant school must be a classroom-based classroom per CDE. So virtual or hybrid, we would only use the ADA amount that is classroom-based. Portables are eligible, but the actual facility, if it is a Prop 39 or a district facility, you're not eligible for the lease awards. You are technically eligible for other costs. However, if there's any other cost in the upcoming funding round, and we'll know once the enacted budget if we get the augmentation award. We also will need the good standing form, which is sent and completed by authorizers. Compliance with charter agreement, no pending corrective actions or notice of intent to revoke. If good standing is restored by the end of the fiscal year, applicant will be eligible. And this is also specifically related to lease executions and approval by the board. No response from the authorizers will be presumed as acknowledgement of good standing. So conflict of interest vetting charters must be in compliance with SB 126 government agency transparency rules, including Government Code 1090. And then lastly, the legal status questionnaire. Applicants must disclose any past or current legal, civil, criminal, or regulatory investigations. So up next, we have eligibility and best practices, our 204 form, our STD 204 form. So this is a payee data record. The State Controller's Office uses this form to process awards, and warrants are not able to be sent without an updated 204. So the best practice is to resubmit a 204 form if there's any changes in the name or any changes in the mailing address. Any information that is changed on this form, we will need a new resubmitted and completed form so that there are no delays in receiving your awards. And this form is available on the California Department of General Services website. We have provided a link at the bottom of the slide. Make sure that the form that you complete is the March 2021 form. The State Controller's Office will not accept any other version of it. And just ensure that the school name is an exact match that's listed under the IEN that's found on the IRS website. If the name does not match the IRS website, then we cannot process your award. So please make sure that all that information is filled out correctly. If the school's name is different from the parent organization, make sure that the parent organization name is on that first line and that the DBA name of the school is on the second one. So, and with that, I'm going to go over the application overview. Our online application will be available on CSFA's website on Friday, April 29th of this year. Please make sure that you remember that the deadline is Thursday, June 2nd, 2022 at 5 p.m. No late applications will be accepted. All applications are submitted via our online application, which can be found on CSFA's website in the SB740 program link. And we will send out a reminder to the listserv when the application is open. So applications should be submitted under the school's name. Please make sure that it's the operating school's name so that we are able to find and match that information with the CDE's school directory. Documents must be in PDF form, and a maximum file of 5 megabytes is acceptable. If you have any attachments that are bigger than that, you can just email us directly or to the SB740 email address, and we can attach that to your application. So documents to submit with the application will be the current valid charter agreement petition, approved authorizing board resolution regarding petition approval or adoption, a list of board members, a completed legal status questionnaire, LSQ, and certification signature pages. DocuSign is acceptable for this funding round. Other documents could include board meeting minutes or resolutions and facility appraisals. So all facility and lease agreements must be current and executed by all parties. So please make sure that all signatures are on there. If not, this will just create a bit of a delay with doing your initial review. Each lease agreement should be scanned and added separately, saved by using the following convention: your applicant name, facility street address. For example, XYZ Charter -123 Main Street -2021 to 2025. Just an important note, one upload per facility site. Combine any corresponding amendments or original lease as a single document. So the latest amendment first, please. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan, who will go over facility agreements.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So for facility agreements, the major document of the program, as this is a rent and lease reimbursement program, first and foremost, there's CSFA classifies leases or facility agreements in two different manners. One would be a multi-year agreement, which is any facility agreement that's already been approved and has been unchanged since the most recent funding round. Many of our schools, many of the attendees have multi-year leases. So it would be capped in different ways, which will go forward in the future. But that one is a pretty easy lease review compared to the others, as we're just verifying the newer cost and that the information is still correct. Any type of facility that is not approved, any type of agreement that's not approved, is a new facility agreement or new rent agreement. And it follows pretty much three conventions. One, as if it's a facility that is not been occupied by the charter school, so it's a brand new move, if you will, or brand new school as well. If the school is increasing the square footage in the agreement, then it would be considered a new facility agreement. And then a new agreement in which it expires or is up for renewal, but does not have a clause in there allowing for it. That is the one exception we allow for new facility agreements to become multi-year facility agreements. So for example, let's say your facility agreement was from 2022 to 2024, and there was a option clause in there to appeal or to renew for one additional year, meaning that in 2025 you would have a facility renewed on the same terms. This would be considered a multi-year facility agreement because that renewal option is embedded in the agreement. If there is not an embedded agreement in the approved agreement, then it is considered needing a new facility agreement and has to go through the vetting process, including an appraisal to verify fair market cost. Multi-year leases are capped by COLA, the cost of living adjustment provided by the Department of Finance, and we'll give better examples of that. But each of these kind of lead to which cap we're going to use to get the cost down for eligible, or get the cost determined for the eligible award amount. So here's some examples of new facility agreements. XYZ Charter, let's say they increase their by 50 square feet, which is not a substantial amount. I mean, you know, I guess a bathroom maybe, or something along those lines, technically would be a new facility agreement, and we have to follow all the procedures with that. If they sign a new lease with a new landlord, but it's the same site, same square footage, it is still considered a new facility agreement, as this is technically a new lessor and new agreement in general. So we have to review it to make sure that the costs are still eligible. We'll talk about lease, how long appraisals are good for. So those could be used possibly over like a 3-year period. But again, it would still be considered a new facility. Option 3, if the XYZ charter exercises a renewal that's embedded in last year's lease option, is considered a multi-year lease and is capped at the cost of living adjustment. XYZ opens a brand new charter under the same CAS code, but at a different site. Well, it's a new facility agreement and have to go through the vetting process as such. So the new facility agreements have to be verified through an independent appraisal. So what we would do is require a school to get a appraisal done by a state certified appraiser. Below is the listing of the department, which provides a list of certified appraisers. It's plentiful in many located areas, and they're starting to get more sophisticated when it comes to charter and educational facilities. So do start there, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. We can't advocate for anybody. We don't have an advocate for anybody. We can just tell you to get the site, but we can help you navigate, or if you have any questions about eligibility or whether or not appraiser can be used, we can answer that. We take the fair market rent that is determined in the facility appraisal and use that to set the cap for the new facility as compared to the rent that's listed in the agreement. If the rent is below, then it is below. If it's above the cap settles as the actual amount. So as mentioned before too, just to mention, appraisals are good for 3 years. So let's say, again, for whatever reason, there's a change in landlord and it's the same exact site and same exact information, but again, the landlord changes, it's a new facility agreement under the CSFA's eyes. You could use the appraisal that you turned in the prior year, and that would be able to suffice for our determination. So you don't have to go out and pay for a new appraisal. So again, 3 fiscal years from when the appraisal was submitted. Kind of get into a little bit more of an example because it's kind of complicated, understandably, on this side as to people working through it, getting down exactly how all these caps interact with each other and how it goes through the process. So again, we should see this thing, the ADA cap, the rate that's actually times the 1,298, that is an absolute cap. If your school is hitting that cap and the rent is higher than that cap, then all this calculation is not information you technically need. You're not eligible for other costs. But it is expected that the amount of students you serve is comparable to the size of facility that you lease, and that rent would be at least be able to be mitigated by the ADA cap. So if you have an ADA cap or you know you're hitting that one, this is not so in depth. But if you are working with your reimbursable lease cost as your cap, this is important for you to kind of grasp. So we're going to start in 2017-18. XYZ Charter signed a lease agreement for 25,000 square feet for a 3-year term, or 4-year term technically. We start including 2017. They send an appraisal to us. Their rent is $100,000 per year. The appraisal says that actual fair rent is $125,000. So since that cap is higher than the actual rent, the reimbursable rent is $100,000, and we would do 75% of that, and then lesser than, or the lesser than of the ADA rate, and go from there. For the next year, because it is a multi-year lease, now we're capped by the cost of living adjustment, which was 2.71% that year. The actual rent went up by $5,000. So based on the COLA adjustment, though the actual rent is $105,000, the reimbursable rent based on the COLA cap is $102,710. So that would be the 75% of that goes in. Same with the next year, even though the COLA is a little higher, it's still a little bit less than the $110,000 rent that's provided per the agreement. The reimbursable rent's about $106,058. Then in the next year, you know what, XYZ Charter's growing. They renew their lease agreement, but add about 2,500 square feet to their charter space. So we request that they get a new appraisal, though, I mean, if they didn't have a rent agree or an extension agreement, would have to do the same thing. The appraisal is a little bit lower this time at 129,000 compared to the 130. So that becomes the actual new cap. You can see we have last year's rent, we have the COLA cap, but because it is a new facility agreement, that is not considered. Even though it's the same address, same charter school, it matters on whether or not it's new facility. So 129,000 becomes the reimbursable rent, and then we almost start the process over again, where the next year we go up 5,000. We see the reimbursable, the COLA rate is 2.31, and then we go from there to see which rate the school will be capped at when it comes to reimbursable rent. Feel free to reach out to us when it comes to any questions about this. It's one of those things where if you're working on the program, you have a good grasp of how it goes, but if you're literally giving us documents, a lot of the math that goes in the machine might not be as intuitive as people think. So again, please feel free to reach out or post your questions in the chat. We'll, even if you wanted to email us with exact examples, we'll be able to help you out to give you a good idea of what a couple year span would look like for a charter school if need be. With that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Elizabeth to talk about some data over the last few years.
Okay, so just to run through some general statistics from the program over the last couple of years. As you can see in the table and the charts below, the apportionment amount has been stagnant since like the 2018-2019 funding round. So due to rapid increase in lease costs, the program has been unable to fund other costs as it's done so in previous years. And has actually had 2 pro rata award rates. These pro rata rates in the table for 2021, 2022, and the estimated 2022, 2023. Actually both years are estimates and just subject to change. But as you can see, subsequently eligible lease costs have increased, and hopefully we can reduce with our oversubscription, see how many schools are eligible. And then with that, I like to just briefly go over some of the upcoming events. On April 29th, the funding round application period will begin. You can find the application on our website. And the application portal is already on the website. You can create an account if you already don't have an existing account. If you do have an existing account and your school that has applied in the past, just make sure to go in there and check out if your login and password, if you remember both of them. That way, when the application does open, we don't get so many questions to reset passwords. And in early June, the true-up process will begin for 2021-2022, and the application will close on June 2nd, which is a Thursday at 5 p.m. So here we have provided some reference materials. Please check out our FAQ that's on our website. These are some frequently asked questions that schools have asked over the years and are really useful. We also have our current regulations on our website, which may be subject to change, but these are still the regulations that we are using currently. We also have the pay data record form, if you'd like to download that in case you have any changes or are a new applicant. And then lastly, we have the IRS link to help you fill out that 204 form. And then just to conclude, we've provided our contact information. As you can see, we have our Executive Director, Katrina Johansson, and her email. If you have any questions, you can also submit any questions to either Jeff Martin or myself directly. But we recommend submitting them first to our SB740 email address, which is sb740@treasurer.ca.gov. We check that every day. Those are specific to SB740 questions. And then in the center there, we have our website for CSFA, which is where you can also find the link to our listserv. If you haven't already done so, please sign up for our listserv. We send reminders. We currently, just to remind everyone of our upcoming events or deadlines. And with that, I would like to just really thank everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to add them into the chat box and we will do a brief Q&A.
Yeah, it looks, Elizabeth, it looks like we have a few questions already.
Okay.
We have a question. Will you be providing the slides from the webinar? We will be uploading that to our SB740 webpage. And there's a lot of good information there as well. Just thanks for the data in that presentation, Elizabeth and Jeff. We do have an annual SB740 report that's also on our financials and reporting webpage as well on the CSFA page. So we will be posting this webinar for folks to review afterward. Elizabeth and Ryan, there's a question. The ADA in the formula uses the current awarded P2, is that correct?
For ADA, what happens is for the initial award determination, we use the prior year's ADA as it's the most recent available. If we get more updated, we'll use that, of course, but to determine award amounts. And then by the true up, when we're reviewing lease costs again to verify amounts are correct, we get the P2 data for the funding round fiscal year from CDE, and then use that for the actual final adjustment and award disbursement.
Thanks, Ryan. I have a question regarding the appraisal. If an appraisal is required, does it have to be completed by the filing date of 6/2/22 with the application?
It does not. What happens is staff will review the file, the application, and you will receive a request for an appraisal with a time-related deadline to receive the appraisal or to request an extension. So that would, the earlier the better. It doesn't hurt. Like I said, it's good for 3 years. And if it's within, if it's something that you could get done within July, August, that would be safe. But any exact date would be provided by the request letter provided by staff.
There's a question for the 2022-23 other cost funding. Are we able to include the installation of security cameras at our school? We typically don't answer these types of questions. We do refer you to our regulations. There is a provision in the law that any installed equipment is eligible, but to answer in the hypothetical is a little bit difficult for us. So we typically, we're happy to email with you and look at a service agreement, but yeah. I don't know, Ryan or Elizabeth, if you want to weigh in on that.
Finer details would be pertinent to that answer. Like I said, the idea would be that it would be reviewed by staff typically, the agreement and the actual invoice that's associated with that. But again, please feel free to email us so we can get into the finer details and be able to work that out, so it's not something that you feel like isn't covered leading up to the hopeful allocation being provided.
We have another question here. What charter document will be required in the application if our current charter was automatically renewed for 2 years in the current charter? We're all aware of the bill that extended the charter. So at this point, you're fine with your current charter.
Yeah, it is helpful to note, I mean, in the application if need be, but yes, staff is aware of the extension by 2 years.
Thank you all for the webinar. It's very informative, and thank you for answering the questions today as well. Okay.
That's my favorite one so far.
Is there a list of board members for the application to be, sorry, I think this should read, in the list of board members for the application to be the list of authorizer board members? Oh, the charter school board members. Yeah, not the authorizer. Thank you.
Yes, the board that makes the decisions for the charter school itself would be a safe way to put that. I actually did not see that there was I didn't click on the Q&A section originally, so I was kind of disappointed when I saw nothing in the chat. Any questions why? So this is great.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. Ryan and Elizabeth, I do need to hop.
Okay.
So
All right.
thank you everyone, and we look forward to receiving your applications. And again, we are tracking the augmentation, and we'll know more when everyone else does regarding the enactment of the increase in funding.
Thank you, Katrina.
Take care.
We'll just stay out a little bit longer just to see if any questions matriculate in. We'll try to get this posted within this week, at least the presentation. The other items typically take a little bit more staff time, such as the transcript and recording.
Oh, I think I see one more question. Is the legal status questionnaire and certification form the same as last year?
Yes.
I believe so, yes.
We typically provide that download of the documents too in the application, so do feel free to lean on that if you want to play it safe too.
There's one more question. Can you repeat the piece on what ADA will be used? If ADA hold harmless goes through, what ADA would be used? Example, school is funded on 1920 ADA because it's higher than 2122 ADA. For LCFF purposes, is that what SB740 will use? Or will actual 2122 P2 ADA be used?
So there's two edges about this. We are working with the legislator currently on this item as kind of a secondary tertiary kind of outlier of this. Obviously, the LCFF grant is the #1 focus when it comes to the ADA hold harmless. As of right now, it is pretty much we report on any ADA or use any ADA that provided by CDE. Now, if the mechanism in the proposal requires CDE to report that ADA as the higher number with some caveat, we will use the higher number, whatever the year may be, as long as it's promoted. If there is something where we need to change and be able to allow for that, we would be, it'd be something, known, we would make everyone aware of that, but that would be the only caveat. Our goal is always to kind of match with how the state kind of uses ADA in a functionary way. But at the same time, we're very, governed by our laws and our regulations. So I can't give you an absolute answer, but I can tell you that the goal is to try to match the state or mirror the state when it comes to what ADA they're using from a funding viewpoint for LCFF. Just a lot of, unfortunately, things moving fast right now with that. And so as long as the hold harmless goes through, hopefully it would include the reporting mechanism and nothing would change over here for us. And we would use the higher number they use as an official number. But we don't have any leeway, unfortunately, currently to just kind of go off on our own. It would have to be pending on what they determine to do with the hold harmless provisions. Sorry, that's not too too much more detail, but again, feel free to reach out if you want updates sooner, you don't feel you've heard from us or haven't been able to check in. We do understand that's very important to schools when it comes to their actual award amounts.
We have a couple more questions that I think we have time to answer. First question, does the paid data form have to be submitted? If you do not have a existing one, yes. If you haven't submitted in prior years. And also if the version is outdated, if it's not the March 2021 version, then you will have to submit a new one.
You will not get paid if it is not, we don't have one on file as well. So if you don't think you have one in, do turn it in.
So this question, what should we submit the application if our current lease will expire on June 30th this year, but we do not have a new lease agreement in place prior to the application deadline?
In this instance, we would say, submit if you expect the lease to be the same lease and you're working through the finer details, just provide the lease in your application and explain that to CSFA staff. We will hold off on awarding funding until we get the new lease. We'll be able to provide you estimates and let you know what your award amounts are, but we would not be able to provide, any amount, pending that new lease agreement. If there's some issue with it being held up for a while, that would be a communication or conversation we'd have to have. We do true up at the end of the year to verify leases are completed, so there is some room for us to work with. But if you don't have it in place, the time that you expect it to be in and the general framework and expectation of what it's going to be would help us give you some more information rather than just purely waiting to get the agreement signed and sent to us.
And then last question, our facility is currently under construction, anticipated to be finished by August for the school to open on time. Would an appraisal be required for the building under construction?
So the appraisal would be required for the building when it's completed, for us to be able to determine if the rent is within the fair market rent or under the fair market rent, or cap it at that. This is an important thing, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we might have brushed over this maybe, but for schools that are not open by the deadline, there is a secondary application period in which schools can apply during the month of October. And if things, especially for schools that are just opening or moving to a new site, like if you weren't eligible, you probably aren't on this call, but if you weren't eligible and then you moved to an eligible site before October, you'd be able to apply for SB740 during the second application period. That application period is provided in our, let me stop sharing here, is provided in our regulations, and I'll mention that in a second as soon as I can get to them. But if your school is opening this year, you can wait until the second funding round. It doesn't have any effect on funding. You get into the pot with everyone else, but it allows for schools to make sure a lot more things are tightened down and secured rather than just kind of mad rushing, turning in forms that might not be relevant, or also maybe not the actual location in which the school will be operating in. So for that one specifically, for the newer school, I would go with the second application period, just because it allows for you to have that. But the appraisal should be on the finished facility, so you'd have to wait for the facility to be finished in order to get that. I mean, unless they can do appraisals beforehand, I'm not certain of that, to be quite honest. But it would just have to be an official appraisal. The second application period is from September 10th to October 15th. So again, schools that have moved to an eligible site after the application deadline, or schools that are opening this year. Those would be the two schools that are eligible. Schools that missed the application deadline will not be eligible to apply at the second application deadline if they don't meet those two qualifications, or one of the two. I'm assuming anonymous was maybe all one person. It's pretty interesting. So I don't know if we wanted to just hang out for like a minute or two if anyone has any more questions. Thank you everyone for these great questions. We do, there's a lot to cover and it's hard to make sure that we hit all the finer details that people might be curious to hear on.
Yes. And if there's any additional questions, always feel free to reach out to the SB740 email and we'll be happy to respond.
As well as the FAQs. They're
Yes.
incredibly dense in a good way. There's 12 pages of questions in 10 size font. So there's a lot of things covered in there in the detail that we were answering some of the questions during the Q&A.
There aren't any more questions. Thank you once again for joining us today. All right, do we have one more time for one more question?
Of course.
Okay. So this is a follow-up to the question, the second center for the school. So they will need to apply for the original facility. And could the second facility be a part of the second application period?
Okay, great question, because this is maybe something I should have explained better on my behalf. The second application period is only related to the charter school itself. So though it is moving to a new site, it is the idea that the school was never, ever, ever eligible at all for funding and therefore did not apply. If you applied or the school adds another site, you can go ahead and make sure that you just send us a notification of it, as well as the actual lease agreement. How it would work is, you're only eligible for the months in which the lease was operated. So if you got it mid-year for whatever reason, you sent it in, we would reimburse you for the mid-year months. If it was something, you signed up like literally right after you applied and it was during the whole full school year from August, from July to June, then that would just be, again, something that we just need provided. There's no rule that says that you have to apply with the site that you intend to request for reimbursement. Those could be added throughout the year, technically, as long as we're able to verify use and the eligibility within the actual agreement itself. So great question. Go ahead and just let us know if you plan on adding a second site, if it's something that you are knowledgeable, or even unexecuted agreement is totally fine for us to be able to work with. We just won't be able to provide the funding associated with that, but it helps us be able to get things kind of in a row and be able to find maybe caps that we've hit or give a school better estimation of what they should see funding wise. But everyone under one CDS code, think of this, if you're a CDS code, that's the application. If you're eligible right now for SB740 and you're not a new school, just apply under the first round, and then any new sites you add is a discussion going forward.
And then just to reiterate, we will be providing the slides for the webinar on our website. right, I think with that, we will conclude today's webinar for the 22-23 funding round. Thank you all for participating today. We look forward to your applications.
Thanks, everyone.